Hey everyone, welcome to PetDesk's webinar series. Today we're presenting the state of vet techs, where we are and where we need to go. With us today is a powerhouse panel lineup of veterinary technicians for you who will be introducing themselves in just a moment. My name is Mary Schwartz. I'm a CVT who spent over a decade working in hospitals before joining PetDesk. Now I work with veterinary hospitals to reduce their workload by engaging clients in a more efficient way. I'll be here to help guide the conversation and chime in with the panel here and there. Feel free to use the chat function or the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll take questions at the end. Without further ado, I'm going to open it up for everyone to introduce themselves. Let's start with Stephen.
Hey everyone, I'm Stephen Cital. I'm a RVT and VTS-LAM animal medicine, also a CVPP, currently a lab manager at Stanford University in Department of Neurobiology, and also the second CVNO in the country for a private specialty practice in the Bay Area, which I'm very excited about. And also you might know me from the Veterinary Anesthesia Nerds or the Veterinary Cannabinoid Academy.
All right, let's bounce it over to Liz.
Oh yeah, I'm supposed to pass it.
Hi, I'm Liz Hughston. I'm so pleased to be here today. Thank you so much for having me. Vet Tech Week is a week near and dear to my heart, and I'm happy to be here celebrating with these amazing technicians on this webinar and talking about the state of our profession. I hold every available technician credential in the country. I'm a CVT, LVT, LVMT, and RVT. And I am also a double certified VTS, both in internal medicine and emergency and critical care. I'm co-founder of the Cannabinoid Academy with my good friend and colleague, Stephen Cital. And I'm president of the National Veterinary Professionals Union. And I'm hoping we'll get to talk a little bit about that today too. And I'm going to pass it to Ken.
Hey everyone, Ken Yagi. I'm a veterinary technician specialist in emergency critical care and small animal internal medicine. Been in the field for 20 odd years now. I'm currently the chief veterinary nursing officer for Veterinary Emergency Group, and I also serve as the program director for the Recovery Initiative, and have done quite a bit of things on both the clinical leadership and educational pathway, and have a lot to say about the profession. So thanks for having me here. David?
Hi, everybody. Happy Vet Tech Week. My name is David Liss. I'm an RVT in California. I recently started with Veterinary Emergency Group as a regional operations director. So I'm kind of representing the management leadership direction that you can take your career. So I am a VTS. I spent many years in emergency critical care, and I have an internal medicine VTS as well. But I also went back to school and got my MBA and have my certified veterinary practice manager certification as well. So I've been in management now over 10 years, but I spent 10 years prior to that doing veterinary nursing. So awesome. Super excited to share the panel with y'all, and let's kick it off.
Yeah, so any questions that anyone needs answering, this panel's got it under control. So we had this panel a year ago, discussed the veterinary technician career and what we need to do to improve it. And here we are a year later. What has changed in the past year for veterinary technicians and their career outlooks?
Oh boy, well that that is a loaded question, but I think there's a few things that stick out to me. One, the AVMA, I think Ken, you're on this committee, had put together the Committee of Veterinary Technician Utilization, and they submitted their report in earlier 2022. We also have two other big industry partners, AHA, really dedicating some time and focus on veterinary technicians, which I'm super excited about. And then certainly NAVC has done a really good job with trying to amplify the voices of veterinary technicians, assistants within the industry. So I think that's a really positive change. At least it's starting the discussion. You know, one thing I see in veterinary medicine is we're really good at starting these discussions, but maybe the follow through isn't the best. So we need to hold ourselves accountable to make really actionable and palpable changes based off of these discussions and these initiatives. So I think that's a great start, at least in my book.
I'll say too, real quick off of Stephen, that at the VHMA, so the Veterinary Hospital Managers Association meeting, this past it was a couple months ago in Orlando, technician utilization was a huge topic in the kind of open meeting, and you know, there were some managers that were kind of talking about this mid-level practitioner thing, but all of them were saying we can't fill the gap for our demand with veterinarians. And so we need to be talking about how to utilize technicians. So managers are talking about this too, you guys. Your hospital managers, your administrators are also kind of saying, hey, we've got to figure out ways to elevate veterinary technicians.
I guess, Stephen, I think the task force that you're talking about, I actually wasn't a part of. I think it might have been Ed Carlson that represented NAVTA for that AVMA utilization task force. And they've done a good amount of research going into this, and sure, follow-up work to come, I think. And looking forward to the work through AHA as well. That's great. So utilization obviously has been a huge focus. I think that one of the things over the course of my last year, I think that one of the great things that I thought I was able to influence in my position was creating a pay scale that sort of shook the veterinary field up a little bit. And since then, there's been so much effort from everyone's end on trying to improve the longevity of our career by improving things like pay, taking a look at what kind of environment that we all might be working in, with a toxic workplace being fairly common and being talked about, and how we change that. How do we bring a positive workplace to for all of us to be in? And so I think there's a lot of great work, if not by organizations that directly affect the practices in that kind of way, by the practices themselves trying to make it a better world for us. So lots of good effect there.
I think that the focus has really turned in the veterinary profession to really have a more strong focus on the veterinary technician and veterinary assistant side. I do think it's important as a baseline for our discussion to use proper and legal terminology. So, I think it's really important that we start differentiating between technicians and assistants when we have these kinds of discussions, when we're talking to practice leaders, when we're talking to our own management or other members of other parts of the veterinary profession, because there are differences between us and among us. And I think when we start talking about utilization, that is really the inroad that we need to focus on to make sure that we are being utilized legally, appropriately, based on our title, our education, our experience, all of those things. Our credential, honestly, many states have scopes of practice that are really key for us to take a look at before we start having the utilization conversation. Some of us are in states where the Veterinary Medical Board is very focused on what RVTs are doing and not doing, or CVTs or LVTs or LVMTs. And there are some states where the Veterinary Medical Board doesn't really care who does what. And I think those things are now things that we're starting to wrestle with as a profession, and that people are starting to recognize that impacts retention, and that retention is the key. We can't graduate our way out of the workforce crisis. We have to utilize our credentialed technicians. We have to utilize our assistants. We have to support credentialing. We have to pay people appropriately or they'll leave. And, I listened to last year's conversation, which was fantastic. And I think that is a huge point, that we need to bring people back to the profession. We need to keep people in the profession. And I don't think a lot has changed from the conversation last year to this year in terms of our turnover rates, retention. Part of it is more positive workplaces, focusing on the toxicity in the profession. But I think part of it's pay, part of it's just respect. When we don't have respect for our role, our job, our licensure, many of us decide it's just not worth it to fight.
I just wanted to call out a couple of things as well, since we're talking about what's changed and tangible changes that are happening. And that I think since NAVTA's put out their title protection report, there's a lot of focus on title protection. So there's many states that have taken up activity towards it. I like to call out Colorado Association of CVTs. That's now establishing licensure in Colorado, and it's a very significant milestone for the entire profession if you look at it, because it's a technician-run organization that is going to conduct the certification process that leads to licensure that's recognized by the government, which is a different setup from any of the other states that we have today. New Hampshire is currently going through the process of getting their credentialing approved. And so if you think about state by state regulation and credentialing and standards being upheld and title protection being implemented, there's many examples of that if you count even just from last year. So I'm very optimistic about the changes going forward.
So we
I
are
think-
seeing,
Sorry.
oh, no,
Beth.
sorry, Stephen, go for it.
I was just going to expand on that a little bit more. I absolutely agree with Ken and Liz. And I think it's important for our management and our veterinarians to also understand there's some accountability on their end. You know, don't call everyone a technician, don't call everyone a nurse, don't call them whatever if they're not. And I think that helps at the delineation. But we also need to have that kind of uncomfortable conversation, especially, we always see this every Vet Tech Week of, is this a holiday? Is this a week for veterinary technicians that are credentialed versus assistants? And it's fine to delineate those two. There's not a lesser in this team approach. There's absolutely not a lesser. And so we also need to be responsible to have these own conversations with ourselves and our colleagues and say, you know, like, hey, you are just as awesome as I am. We're better together. But understanding that delineation and understanding appropriate pay scales for those delineations, there's certainly going to be overlap because, as we all know, I was one of them. I was an assistant for years and I was like, oh, I can do anything an RVT can do, which is absolutely true. But you also have to respect that license. I can do a lot of things that the doctors can do, but I don't get to call myself a doctor. So having those conversations is going to be important, and embracing these different roles within the veterinary team, I think is pretty critical. And again, just going back to that self-accountability and certainly accountability as professionals in title protection or titling in general.
I think navigating those conversations is really difficult, and avoidance is always the easier thing, right? Because there's this idea that if something is different, it must be bad. But exactly like you said, Stephen, it doesn't mean that one is less or more than the other. It simply means that we are holding different roles on the same team, all pulling for the same goal, which is the health and welfare of animals. So what do you all see as holding the tech community back from faster change? I mean, we are seeing a lot of great reporting coming out and the discussion is starting, but how do we not let this be the end point of it? How do we push forward continuously?
I think as technicians, and certainly with these big industry partners like AVMA, NAVC, AHA, et cetera, voicing this out loud and putting it in media so that, you know, I think as technicians, we're all aware of this conversation. It's not a huge conversation for us to have. It's a huge conversation for our veterinarians, for our practice managers, for, you know, the owners of these practices to really start having an understanding. So I really think it's on us to keep this conversation going and really kind of push this narrative that we want to continue. You know, something that I'm going to say that. Someone next.
I mean, I agree. I think the more we talk about it, those of us who have a voice, for whatever reason, right? Whatever reason we're able to articulate these things in public, at state board meetings, at the national level, at the state, you know, county, state, national level, the more we can articulate these issues, the more that draws attention to them. And I think that's how we keep the attention, is that we who are really technician and assistant advocates, that we are people out there keeping the message alive, talking about the things that we're seeing, talking honestly about the failures that we see and holding people accountable. And it takes voices, lots of voices to do that, to keep holding people's industry, the profession's feet to the fire, so to speak, so that we continue to stay focused and not allow these things to just fall back. You know, like Stephen said, technicians know this is going on. Technicians and assistants, we've been having these conversations for 40 years. So what is going to change now? What is the point now, since given that everything old is new again, and we're just having these same conversations, it feels like, for the last 40 years? I think the key is holding our allies accountable. And that means our allies in management, our allies in the veterinary group on, the DVM side. Those are the people who have seats at the table that we're not allowed to sit at yet. And those are the voices that we need to create the true changes that we need to see. So we need to fight for those seats at the table. And then when we get those seats at the table, we need to speak up and we need to really advocate for ourselves, for our profession, for everyone that is impacted by those decisions.
So I thought that's really great information, kind of on the industry side and kind of how to start moving that needle. I wanted to shift the focus slightly to kind of all of the people who are attending today, to think also about you and your personal empowerment and how you can improve your own lived experience as a technician. So like we can start off on the first piece of, if you don't like where you work or don't like the role you're doing, there are other roles out there. There are hospitals that utilize technicians and advertise that they utilize technicians. In California, we're going to be having some pay scale transparency laws coming out soon where you're going to basically be able to look at job ads and see what the ranges are for positions. And Veg is one company. There are other companies too that are publishing their pay scales. VCA has done some work about doing some kind of across the board minimums and stuff.
Unionization
so a lot of that
also leads to wage transparency. I'll just put in a plug there.
Sure.
Organizing labor unions
Yep.
lead to wage transparency and better pay.
Yeah, sure. So that's one piece, right? Pay is is one piece of that pyramid. But the other thing I think is to just continue to get newsletters and go to conferences and network and learn about opportunities, including certifications. And they don't, it can be VTS and CVPM and all these other things, but there's also smaller, minor certifications that NAVC and other companies and organizations offer. So I talk to a lot of technicians who, say, gosh, the VTS is really overwhelming. I'm not sure I could do that in my practice. Well, there's a dental certificate or there's a lot of other stuff to do. So if you find an area of a practice that you find really interesting, go for it. And if clinical is not going to be your what's going to drive you forward for the next 10 years, there's a lot of other things that technicians can do. There's research, there's education, there's industry. You can be a clinic partner and sell products and, support great medical care that way. So a lot of other stuff to do. So just remember that there's absolutely the industry voice. And I think Liz is totally spot on. And then I also want to remember to empower each of you in your own lived experience to figure out what you want to do with your career. There's a gazillion opportunities out there. And sometimes it's overwhelming. So your state vet tech association is going to be a great way to get access to a lot of, stuff that's happening in the profession. And that will, we can only know what we know, right? We don't know what we don't know. So if you figure out what you don't know, you're going to expand your universe.
So I think everyone brought up a really good, all sorts of good points. And I want to try to provide an additional angle to this, that through the course of the last several years of being involved in organized veterinary medicine, I think there's definitely a need for us to come together to create a better unified voice, for sure. And I think that as we talk about seats at the table at different organizations or different councils or different committees, I think that we're still in a very reactive mode in that we get these seats, things start happening around us. And then we say like, wait, how come we didn't hear about this? Or how come we're not involved in this conversation? And we need to turn more into a proactive mode of seeing what's coming down the line and being able to respond to it appropriately. So I think in terms of infrastructure, I've seen NAV to change from having the state representative committee to turning it into a district rep system that is a bi-directional communication that people from the field and the state associations can talk to the national association and back and forth. Is it perfect? It's not perfect. I think there's revisions to be made and refinements to continue to be made. The Vet Nurse Initiative now is setting standards that we aim towards. And then there's a government relations committee that is working on creating legislative relationships and working with the state associations to strengthen that around the nation. So I feel like the infrastructure has been built over the course of the past several years to help us be more proactive in this kind of sense and be able to work on that. But I also working in like more of the private company side now for a while too. I've kind of started to see the different roles that each of these play, that private companies or your own hospitals, the people that are attending this webinar, are a lot more nimble. You can make changes within your own hospitals a lot more quickly, within your own companies a lot more quickly, which is where we can spearhead some change, get it out there in the field, make some people uncomfortable, but some of these things are going to work, and that's going to change the culture of veterinary medicine altogether, which is really going to make the organizations like AVMA, AHA, NAVTA take a look at all of this and become the force behind it to, once we create the momentum, become the inertia behind it that creates real change that sticks. So I think that all those pieces need to come together for us to be able to make real change.
Yeah, absolutely. Tons of moving pieces. But fortunately, a lot of those pieces are actually on the board now. So we just have to keep them moving, right? So we talked a little bit earlier about pay, and last year that was the majority of what our conversation centered around was fair pay for training, education, and skills. What can we do to keep moving the needle in that direction? Or is there something that people can do in their clinic on their own? I know that we have other larger things at work moving the pay in the right direction, but how do we keep that going on an individual level?
I want to chime in. Well, first of all, VEG has done an excellent marketing campaign as far as getting their pay scales out there. And I do think that has helped the industry tremendously. So I do appreciate that. But a simple thing is, instead of creating a pay scale and have, minimum wage as your kind of base rate, look at your specific county or city's cost. What's the term, Liz, that I'm looking for?
The living wage.
The living wage. Thank you. The living wage for your particular
Liz.
county or city.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
And really having that as your baseline, and go a few dollars above that if possible. That's a very easy thing for us to do if you can't necessarily meet some of these other pay scales financially from your practice. It's a very easy, quick thing to do.
I popped that in the chat, the living wage calculator. There's also a family budget estimator from EPI that does the same thing. I think living wages is a tough topic because it's not really defined, and it depends on the resource you look at to determine what that really is. One of the best definitions I think I like for a living wage is that it's a wage that you pay someone that they don't have to pay more than 30% of their income for their living expenses, meaning their rent. So their roof over their head. So whether that's an apartment or a house, mortgage, whatever it is, I think that is, that's a really important thing to think about. So what we're talking about really is a bare minimum to live in the city or where you're located, where the person lives. So we're not taking into account the skills or education or licensure or any of the other things that we really should consider when we're talking about paying professionals. These are not people who are coming, or they shouldn't be, people who are coming in with no knowledge, with no skills, who, in the last discussion, there was some fast food talk, right? So you can get a job flipping burgers. Like, it's pretty easy to train somebody to flip burgers. It's really difficult to train someone to monitor a post-operative patient. It's a different set of training. It's a different kind of skill, and we should be rewarding that skill. And the more we reward that skill and education and knowledge, the more that people will want to be a part of it. They'll see it as a profession, not just a stepping stone job. And I think the reason we continue to have these discussions about pay is because the perception hasn't changed. We're not seen as professionals, as co-equal professionals as a part of the veterinary medical team. We are seen as people to come in and do a job. And that is not how, none of the people on this panel feel that way about this. This is our career. This is our profession. This is not, quote unquote, just a job. And we need to recognize that there are lots of people that are in vet med because it is just a job, and that's fine. But if we want to treat it like a profession and a career, we need to compensate people, and not just compensate them, but respect them. And that respect, I think those two go hand in hand. And I think that that is a big thing that's lacking, is there's just a lack of respect for, particularly for credentialed technicians, if I must be honest, but really for all of us who work on the veterinary care team.
I'm sure that there's more to discuss around this topic, but I just want to hop in and throw in the statistic. We mentioned earlier the survey NAVTA did earlier this year about technician title protection, things like that. And I'm going to reference the NAVC study. I'm all up in these studies now. The NAVC study that surveyed a little over 1,000 pet parents to ask them what they think veterinary technicians do. And just 73% of those pet parents understood that a certified veterinary technician's role in the clinic was to clean up pet waste, feed, and groom pets. Once they were educated about the education, credentialing, the board licensure that folks have to go through to become CVT, LVT, RVT, 84% of those pet parents would trust the credentialed individual as much as a veterinarian. So I just want to throw that in there to keep the discussion around this going, with pay and respect being part of that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think I want to call out something real quick. I think what's happening, everybody in the chat, is when you go to chat at the very bottom, it says 2, and there's a big blue bar that says hosts and panelists. And I think a lot of the people attending today are sending stuff directly to us, and we're shooting back messages, send it to the group. You have to click that button and click everyone, and then it will share to the ether, which is what we want. Thank you, Wendy, for just adjusting that with the comment. So I think that's what's happening a little bit. So I'll jump in for just 2 seconds and just say that, you know, I want to make sure for the people on board here, you may work at a hospital where pay or ceilings or these kinds of things are being discussed, and I am frankly sorry to hear that. That's not what a CVPM or the VHMA or anybody supports. So change your job, go work for somebody else that doesn't. There's a lot of really great managers out there, and we're all in that sphere struggling with the idea of how to pay you all what you really deserve. Now, I'm not saying that, action speaks louder than words, right? If they're not doing it, I got nothing for you. But there are ways that your clinic and management can do this. And I think COVID really accelerated a lot of this. Now, inflation's out of control. So if you got, a 10% raise, inflation's at 8, you're only making 2% more. We do think inflation's going to come down. If you keep your 10% raise, you'll end up with a little bit more in the bank. So knock on wood. But what happened was, veterinary medicine, I think, generally finally said, you know what, we've been undercharging for a long time. We did very kind of small 2 to 3% yearly price increases, and all of a sudden we couldn't keep up with demand. And this is like basic economics. And demand goes crazy, you raise the price. You have to throttle the demand because you can't save everybody. I mean, that's just kind of the way it works in a capitalist society, which is what we are. So demand went crazy. We did a bunch of price raises, absolutely had tons of veterinary team members saying enough, we need to get paid more. We were, I don't want to say finally able to, but we were able to start justifying the pay raises. And now I think we really have turned a corner in saying, you know what, clients have to pay for excellent care and excellent team members. And there's that kind of Virgin Airlines approach of, if you take care of your staff, they'll take care of the clients. I think really great hospitals and really great managers are starting to embrace that piece. I think, pay scales is a very new thing in vet med, but it's something that's going to be legally required in certain states. And so there's just a lot of factors to consider. On the management side too, you put out a job ad and you're advertising, say in California, for an RVT at $16 an hour, nobody's going to apply. So you have to ratchet that up and ratchet that up and ratchet that up until you start getting applicants. And that's good for the RVTs. That means that you're going to be coming in at higher wages. So that type of economic push and pull is forcing itself now on the business management side. So as a manager, I'm saying we're hearing it, we're listening. We know that we can't find great talent if we don't adjust wages, and we're learning how to adjust pricing to maintain profit kind of in that interim. So some stuff is going to be 2 steps ahead, some is 2 steps back, but there are really great hospitals that are doing that now, which is great. And I think COVID really sucked the last 2 years, but it really helped in that regard too. There was some forced change that had to happen.
David said the dirty P word. which is which is a word I didn't hear in the previous
Profit.
conversation. And I think it's important to bring that up because there's a lot of questions in the chat and in the Q&A about how do we maintain profit? And maybe we have to be willing to take a slightly less profit, a slightly lower amount of profit. I know that is anathema in our capitalistic society. How dare I suggest that anyone take less profit? But we see, as we see more venture and private equity money coming into veterinary medicine, they are not coming into veterinary medicine because they believe in quality healthcare for pets. They are coming in. The only thing that venture and private equity does is make more money. So they are coming into vet med to make more money. And there are companies out there that raise prices multiple times a year with no drop in client visits, with no drop in the number of patients that they're treating or seeing. And they are not passing those increases onto their team. So the vets might be getting paid more because they get paid partly on production in most of these scenarios, but the team isn't making any more money. So those price increases are happening, and where is that money going? Okay, we know inflation is taking some of that, but the rest is all going to profit. And I think if these corporations could recognize that a slightly lower amount of profit, like maybe one less $1 million or one less billion with a B dollars, they might be willing to take a slightly less amount of profit so that they can hire enough people to provide the care that they are charging for. Because that's something I think owners don't recognize, is that they're paying for care that in this current environment, their pet is not receiving.
So I guess there's definitely corporations out there. I had a recent conversation with the people at AHA at their conference that they let me do a talk on how do we pay our veterinary technicians like nurses. And it was a pretty good conversation. I think while there are a lot of corporations out there that are corporate groups now, there are a lot of individual practices out there suffering with the same kind of issue. And so they're not necessarily, if we play to that thought process that corporations are looking for profit, individual hospitals may not be as much, but they're still suffering with the same kind of thing. So I think about what the way to increase, because we've been talking about and we've been saying that technicians need to be paid more. Great, everyone accepts that. How do we do that is the question. And so then that I think, David, you probably could speak to this a lot better than I can, but it's just based on top line, how much money comes into the hospital, what's our expenses, what's the money that's left over, and that becomes our profit, and it needs to be financially sustainable. And so the top line is stuff like price increases, like people talked about. It has to be an appropriate price increase that doesn't turn people away, so we can't help our patients well enough, and it's acceptable to the pet owners. And it also makes us feel icky to have to charge a lot more for something that used to be cheaper, right? Utilization. Do we have a more efficient team so that we can bring in more revenue? And that's how we increase the top line. And there's a lot of conversation surrounding that, so I won't rehash that. But so then, like, expenses, there's the fixed costs like rent and things like that. I'm simplifying this quite a bit, guys. But some of the variables are things like cost of goods. How much does our supplies cost? Those kinds of things. How do we get our equipment in a cheap enough manner that we can save the most of it for other things? And then the biggest variable might be the wage, and that's where it's easiest to maybe cut, because it's harder to find a source for cheaper supplies. That's just as good, for example. And that's kind of the place where we go to scheduling people appropriately, making sure that we're paying people for the right skill level, but not just the hard skills, because we all know our colleagues who maybe do their job really well, but maybe they're not the best teammates. So there's merit portion that goes to how good of a culture contributor you are, team player you are, what attitude you bring, things like that play into it, and then turn it into that pay scale so that people get paid fairly. And so I think that while we tend to put a lot of this on the hospital side. I've also started to talk to our profession about what do we bring to the table in the hospital? How do we contribute? And how do we command that pay?
I would say that was a great summary, Ken, of like
Oh,
the
yeah.
process that management and veterinary and clinic should go through to manage their that side of it. So you did, that was great.
I think another simple thing that adds value to our value is, I don't know where I'm at personally with the open concept kind of hospital, but I do think that adds value. If clients get to see what we're actually doing and they're back there watching the surgery or seeing us give an injection or, doing CPR, whatever we're doing out there, that adds value to what those customers are paying for. Because right now our model is we just take it back. They don't see what happens to their animal. And then you get a $700 bill and they're like, what is this for? But when they're involved in that, I think there's a lot better respect and understanding for some of these prices, even if there is an increase in a relatively short period of time.
I think scope of practice is really key. Someone in the chat mentioned this. Are we making sure that DVMs aren't doing technician skills? Because if you're a hospital manager and you have veterinarians doing technician jobs and skills, or even assistant jobs and skills, not saying that we shouldn't all be team players, we should all chip in and help where we're needed. But if it's a regular thing, if your credentialed technicians are just holding animals or just like cleaning up after animals or walking them or whatever, like you're not taking advantage of the full range of their skills, and you're paying veterinarians a much higher premium to do those jobs. That means you're making less profit on each one of those tasks than if an RVT or even an assistant is doing those tasks. So I think that kind of granularity on the management side is needed to make sure that the right people are doing the right job so that you can maximize the amount of profit that you have coming in for everything you're charging for. That's going to help you charge more appropriately. It's going to help you make more money. We know from an AVMA study that was done, oh my gosh, I think
12
it's
years
16,
ago.
no longer. The study itself was like 2007 data.
Oh.
So like we need to redo that study that was done by the AVMA economics division about how much profit a credentialed technician brings to a practice. And the adjusted number based on inflation and change in the dollar value, it's like $200,000, over $200,000 per credentialed technician per DVM in profit. And yet we're not paying our technicians in a way that recognizes how much profit they're actually driving for the practice. And I think it's for a lot of reasons, which we're talking about today. But I think part of it is missing that granularity. Who's doing what job and what are we charging for that?
And there was the other follow-up AVMA economic study, Neil et al. And, they were calculating that there's about a 66% of whatever base salary that you're paying for either the veterinarian or the technician or assistant that it takes for you to fill that position again, on top of an additional $35,000 loss in profits annually waiting to fill that position, which is on average like 5.7 weeks, which I feel like is maybe a little bit conservative compared to what we're experiencing in the market right now.
Yeah, I definitely think 5.7 weeks might be a little conservative. One of the ways that I really liked maximizing technician profitability at my clinic was charging a technician appointment fee. So normally in a lot of clinics, we see that technicians are doing things like giving cytopoint injections or booster vaccines or, examining an incision, changing a bandage. They're doing these things for no cost to the client. This should be a service that generates profit for the practice. And it also speaks to the client. And of course, the transition is a little bit rocky at first because your clients don't understand the value of your technician's time, but it then imbues in the client an understanding of the role that the technician has in the practice and the value of their time and services. So if you are not currently charging a fee for your technician appointments, that is one thing that you can take back from this panel today, take to your owners and talk about instituting a fee for technician services. Before we jump into the Q&A, we've had a great discussion so far. I want to make sure that we didn't leave anything out. Is there anything anybody wants to hop on and discuss before we hop into our Q&A?
I think one thing that I'd like to throw out there is we have a project going that is titled the Advanced Practice Veterinary Nursing Project, which isn't the same kind of advanced practice that happens in human medicine, because that's kind of the nurse practitioner or physician's assistant that can actually do diagnosis, prescription, and surgery to some extent. But within the current scope of practice that is assigned to our profession, how much of the veterinarian's work can we actually take on if we push it to the limits? The patient comes in, the technician or nurse is the person that is doing the physical exam, getting a problem list going, thinking about the potential diagnostics, creating a recommendation, going to the doctor confirms all that and says, okay, let's do these diagnostics. And then the diagnostic result comes back. This person is already interpreting it, thinking about what kind of issue this patient might have, not making a diagnosis, but thinking about the problems. And then thinking about a treatment plan and making a recommendation. The doctor looks at it, signs off on it, and they're off on their way with the team of nursing care team members to take care of the treatments. And so that's like a way for us to serve almost like a nurse practitioner, to the best of our abilities within the current laws as these conversations happen, as our scope gets more and more expanded. So thinking about those kinds of things, pushing the limits, it makes people uncomfortable. It makes veterinary medical boards uncomfortable sometimes, but being able to create success cases is what's going to allow us to put things out there that make people more and more comfortable that it is safe, that it does increase profitability, it increases patient care, it increases pet owner satisfaction. You know, all of that is going to be important. So I'd like for all of us to think about not just that, like different ways that we can push the limits to create good examples.
The
Yeah,
interesting part is we have decades of that kind of practice model in lab animal medicine. In lab animal medicine, we do surgery, we do prescribe, we do diagnose, we do all these things, and it's all reported to the USDA. So we have foilable information and decades of information showing that the success with this model. I absolutely agree, Ken.
Awesome last point. Thank you so much, Ken. I am going to drop in the chat an email. If you have any further questions about unionization or about unions within our industry, you could direct them to Liz at the email I just sent through in the chat. We've seen a lot of those questions pop up. So please, again, feel free to email her, and
I don't want to derail this discussion too much, but also Mary, hey, I'll put in a plug for PetDesk. If you want to have a unionization webinar, you hit me up.
That one's above my pay grade. I just show up and talk. So that's where my talent lies. But we'll get with Judy, Liz. So let's hop into our questions. We got a lot of questions around the pay topic. I know no one is surprised about that. So primarily we're talking, how do we create this pay scale? How do we differentiate between credentialed and non-credentialed staff? And kind of on the outlier of that, what do you do about those staff who have been in practice 20 years and they're not credentialed and they have no interest in pursuing that credentialing?
I think for me, you know, and this was an interesting thing in the conversation from last year, I thought too, is I think we have to find out what it is about becoming credentialed that they're not interested in. Like, why? If they've been doing this for 20 years, why have you been doing this for 20 years and yet you don't want to become credentialed? And I think getting to the root of that question is important to then determine. I mean, I think that helps to determine what value you're going to put on that person's role in your practice. Credentialed technicians take so much pressure off of veterinarians because it's not all on your license, it's on our license too. We can share the load with you, veterinarians, and we want to share the load with you. Assistants can't share the load in the same way because they don't share the same level of accountability that credentialed technicians do. And I think that's a really important distinction. And so if someone wants to stay an assistant because here's the thing I hear a lot, I get to do everything that a credentialed technician does, so why would I become credentialed? why would I go through the trouble or the time or the money to be credentialed when I can do everything that a credentialed technician can do? So we have to fix that by changing scope of practice laws and by ensuring that veterinarians are actually following scope of practice laws. If it's, I don't have the time or money to go to school, and if practices truly value credentialing, they need to help. They need to subsidize tuition and provide time for people to go to school, or mentoring programs, or all of the above. If it's, I'm not going to get paid more to be credentialed, this is again a problem that management and and the businesses in the veterinary profession can fix by creating a path that makes sense for people to become credentialed, because they're going to make more money, they're going to get to do more things, they're going to have more respect, more of a voice in the practice, opportunities for leadership if that's what they want. But I see tons of assistants being put into head tech or lead tech roles. That is demoralizing for credentialed technicians, regardless of the level of experience of that assistant. It's tough. It's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of us. And so I think that there's a huge incumbent responsibility on management and on these corporations and the policies that they put forward to help those people become credentialed, and to give them the motivation to do so. Because right now, in lots of places, there's very little motivation. You're not going to get more pay. You don't get to do anything different in your day-to-day work. You're certainly not going to get more respect. You don't have any more opportunities. So why would you do it?
I'm going to push back just a tiny bit, Liz, and just say, or we just respect them as veterinary assistants, and maybe that's a career path they want to do. We have nurse assistants, we have vocational nurses, and that's fine. And
no, I didn't get to that point either. It could be that, hey, I'm not interested. I just like doing my job. That's great. And we can value a person in that way in terms of pay scale and all of those things, using entirely different rubrics, which is totally fine. But I think we have to find out why, the reason why.
Fair enough. Yeah. And I think the other part of just respecting an assistant maintaining as an assistant is the assistant also has to understand there just won't be opportunities available to you unless you're credentialed. And that's just a personal growth kind of own accountability thing that we're just going to have to accept. I'm not going to be able to do things like a doctor, even though I know how to do them. And that's just the profession.
And I guess the next step to that is, as the states start to define the scope of practice and restrict it to credentialed individuals further, the people who have been in the field very long and having the experience to serve in a similar role where the scope of practice isn't defined, that's going to start to narrow down as the years go by. So that's the reason why all of us on this call are always encouraging for people to look for credentialing, get support on that. Yes, sometimes you don't have the time to do it and you feel like maybe that's not a path for you, but some places you have to push yourself and get that done so that you can continue in your career pathway if that's what you want to do.
So I'll second that real quick with Ken. As somebody who's developed and launched multiple pay scales, I will say, and they were perfect. I mean, when you don't have a pay scale and you try to throw a pay scale out there, you're going to piss somebody off. It's just going to happen. But you have to work through it. At least there's something. But I will say, and I want to just kind of echo his point about self-motivation, empowerment. I have literally personally delivered, checklists and skill sets for people to move from level 1 to 2 with an additional pay increase, and asked them to, hit milestones, and gotten back a crumpled piece of paper that was not completed. And then they wanted to know why they didn't get their $2 raise. So you have to do the work, and this happens at every level. My mom was a teacher for 30 years. She went back to school at, I think, 53 to get her master's, because she was going to get into that next band of pay scales. And, that's what she had to do. So, I'm not 100%, I'm not saying if you're underpaid as a technician, that's a different issue. You got to be paid for kind of that base. But if you're, relatively in a range and you want to be moving to another range, you have to think about, as I think Ken mentioned earlier, merit raise is a merit raise. That's usually a little bit more around kind of the cost of living type deal. But if you want to move a large band, if you're already at okay and you want to move a large chunk, you have to figure out what that next step is. So is it taking on a leadership role? Is it taking on additional clinical role? Is it building a revenue stream like tech appointments for yourself? So there's a lot of pieces there, and I'm not chastising you guys. I totally get it. You're super busy, but I do think that you just have to remember too, that management, and I'm speaking from the management side, I'm taking that role, but you launch a pay scale, and then we often will have a conversation of like, nobody did the work, so we're not given the raises, right? So you got to do that too. And that's just stuff you have to accept. And that has nothing to do with taking on a credential or going back to school or any of that. But if management in your hospital does launch a pay scale, that's awesome. It doesn't mean that you're just going to happen into the next bucket and make $4 or $5 more an hour without possibly having to be assessed and do skill work and show in front of maybe a doctor and the manager you can do things effectively and appropriately. So just to throw that out there.
Agree. 150% agree. Yes, you are exactly right.
And just to piggyback off of what David said, we have a question about how can we attract more people to this industry, to this role, and definitely having those pay scales, having those roles defined clearly can help be that motivational factor for folks who might be saying, hey, I love what I do. I do the same thing as every other credentialed technician in this practice. So why am I going to spend, X amount of dollars and several years trying to work and go to school at the same time when I can do the same thing?
Are you talking about, are they saying like bringing people that are not vet people into the industry, or like generally how to recruit better? What was the question there on that?
So let's hit it for both angles, right? How can we uplift those and help people who really would like to go ahead, but maybe have barriers in their way to get their credentialing? And how do we attract people from outside of the industry? Those high school graduates who don't know anything about the industry, think they maybe want to be a doctor, get in practice, and they're like, how can we attract those people and retain them within the industry and get them on the right career path?
A great question. I don't know if I have a great answer for how to do that, but I think that's where NAVTA, maybe AVMA, although they're kind of the doctor organization. I know that's, political, but like NAVTA needs to create a lot of consumer-facing educational programs about why kids in high school should be able to go to vet tech school or go to vet assistant school or do things that are, exciting to them, or having animal health care, like immersion programs in middle school or high school.
Right. And I think it's catching those people, who think they want to be veterinarians. Because I can tell you in my career, my 18-year career, I guess, that I have worked with plenty of doctors who only want to do technician skills. Mm-hmm. That's all they want to do. They want to place IV catheters. They want to take care of the patients in the hospital. That's all they want to do. They don't want to do doctor stuff. And yet they went to vet school and they have that degree, and that's what they're, kind of stuck doing. And I think if we catch people sooner, I had no idea when I was a child growing up that veterinary technician was a career, that there was a license that you could get, that it wasn't just girls in the back doing the work. And I think that part is key, is just letting people know that it is truly a career path. Right now, it's not quite a career path. We're working on it. Start having conversations like this are moving the needle in that direction to make it an actual career as opposed to just a job. And I think if we catch more people who are interested in veterinary medicine early in their career, like before they go to vet school, so middle school, high school, college, and we let them know what a credentialed veterinary technician does, what our role is, how it can be a career, that many people wouldn't actually go to vet school. They would choose to be a veterinary technician. But we have to let people know about us before we can get, but I think that's the key thing, is really driving that awareness earlier and earlier to draw people in. And then we have to focus on getting people back. And we do that through pay and respect and getting people back into the profession. Because I talk to a lot of people who say, I only left because I couldn't get paid. I couldn't pay my rent. I couldn't buy food. That's why I'm now a human nurse and I hate it. And I wish I was back in vet med. And I hear that from a lot of people. And so we need to find a way to bring those people back as well.
And I might get a little heat for this just because I'm not in the typical clinical small, private practice or corporate practice setting. We also need to be better about advertising what veterinary technicians can do. It's not just working in this vet hospital setting. You know, you can go work at NASA, you can go work at the FDA, you can go work in research, you can do all of these different things within the industry that is outside of the clinic. If you want to work in the clinic, that's fantastic. Work in the clinic for years, maybe feeling a little bit burnt out, go into research or go work at NASA for a couple of years, get your groove back, and you can go back to practice. It's so flexible. And I think we're just so stuck in this, like, you have to work in the clinical practice all the time, when really that just might not be best suited for our lifestyles or our mental health or just our interests in general.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, I never thought I would find myself working for a technology company in the veterinary space, but here I am. And I love it. I get to work with clinics every single day. I still get to talk to technicians. I still get to have those problem-solving conversations. And it's amazing. And I'm much more refreshed now than I was before. But there are lots of different avenues as a technician that you can look at to give yourself a little bit of a breather. And I do want to just, before I ask the final question, I want to go back to something Liz said, which is the girls in the back. Never refer to your professional team as the girls, and that includes your CSRs. That nobody in your team should be referred to as a gender. So start there for respect.
Thank you, Mary. My
Yeah.
goodness.
Oh
yes.
my goodness.
But I mean,
It makes my heart beat faster every time.
I still hear it. And
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's out there.
Oh, it definitely is. And it's a hard habit to break, because even if you're new into the space, this is just how people have been referred to in clinic for so long that everybody around you is referring to them. So do your best, break that mold, and refer to your professionals as professionals by their title, not by their gender. So the last question I want to,
oh, sorry,
Stephen,
Shannon
go
just
ahead.
said something really critical, I think. And never just say, I'm just a, oh my God, it's like a trigger for me. You are never just a anything. So just wipe that from your vocabulary.
Yes. Yes, you are never just a CSR, never just an assistant, never just a technician. Those are the things that you are. So last question I want to confront. We got 3 minutes left. I have no doubt you guys will be able to tackle this. How can individual staff members bring to their managers that we need to get a pay scale instituted and feel empowered to have that conversation started?
It seems like the easy thing to do is, if you have a lack of team members in your hospital, I think there's a lot of room for self-reflection there, and say, hey, maybe we should publish a pay scale here. Maybe we should be a little bit more transparent with things. Maybe we should update things in general. I think looking at the problems in your hospital and trying to find what that root cause is probably going to lead you to a lot of the things that we had in this discussion today.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone. Oh, Ken, do you want to pitch in on that?
One more thing then? I
Yeah.
think that, the other thing that you can do is that there are great examples out there now, right? Like if you do the research around your general area, taking a look at the job ads that are out there, especially in the states that pay transparency is now law, that's going to be more common. But even in states that it isn't required, there are companies out there that will publicize it. And even if it doesn't apply to you, it's not talking about moving to that company or anything like that. Here's an example of a scale that they put together. Maybe we need to be thinking about levels. Maybe we need to be doing assessments in an objective manner that places people in specific skill sets, and really delineating what a credentialed individual should be doing versus what a veterinary assistant should be doing, and starting with that work. And so I think it takes a lot of professionalism in delivering that it's not an antagonistic, why aren't we doing this? Like, you guys aren't doing your job as leaders. Like that kind of approach usually doesn't work. It's more of like, how can we solve this issue together? Just like Stephen was saying, here's an issue. Let's try to solve this together. I have some thoughts. Here's some examples.
I will say, I think that competitive pay is not cutting it anymore. So you can't just look at other veterinary practices unless you happen to have a veg practice nearby. You can't look at other veterinary practices and say, oh, well, we're paying $1 more than the practice down the road, so we're fine, we're competitive. If you're still not getting applicants, if you're not keeping your people, if you still have high turnover, you're not paying adequately. And, Megan in the chat said, you just do it. You just put a pay scale together and you bring it to the boss and you say, hey, I think it would help if we had a pay scale, because it would help give people motivation to work on their skills, on their knowledge, maybe their credentialing. Here's my ideas. What do you think? Let's talk about it. Then it becomes a negotiation. rather than, oh, we can't do this, right? So opening the conversation, I think, is the start. And I love the idea of going back and saying, we're not fully staffed, we're having trouble providing the care and services that we want. How can we help get more people here so that we can do more? And I think one way is to do pay transparency. And here's, I'm speaking as you going to your management, and here are my ideas. And the other thing I will say to management, this is now Liz talking, don't pay new hires more than your current people, especially if they've been there for many, 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 many years. I know that there is a premium on hiring new people nowadays, but nothing drives people into my union loving arms faster than new hires getting paid $2 or $3 more than someone who's been working at a practice for 5, 7, 10, 15 years. So
yeah, you can't do that. Yeah.
No.
Nope,
I want to clarify that though, that Liz and David, are you saying that in the sense of people who come in with the same kind of role, same kind of skill set, you shouldn't be doing?
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
for-
No,
Yeah,
of course.
yeah,
If
Just
they're,
wanna make
I
sure.
mean, management should always be able to justify what they're paying anyone, right? So if someone is coming in with a ton of certifications, or they're a VTS, or they're coming in at a different level, their skills have been measured, their knowledge has been measured, whatever, then management should be able to have a very clear and honest conversation about that. Here's why we're paying them that much. But if you hire a CSR with no previous veterinary experience at $3 more than a CSR who's been working for your practice for 5 years, 7 years, to even 2 years, like, don't do that. That is a demotivator right off the bat.
There's some basic motivation theory behind that.
Paying people more out of desperation isn't what we shouldn't be doing, but we also shouldn't be paying people for people more just for seniority's sake either, because that's also a demotivator for people.
Correct.
Lots of
That's
things.
right. But if
Yeah.
you're having trouble drawing
Exactly.
people in and you're raising prices for those new hires, you should be evaluating all of your pay internally, because you're going to lose you're not going to be able to retain those people because they will jump ship for someone who's paying more to their new hires.
Yep. And having to raise that base salary to get that new hire in, you're going to spend all of that on losing your person who's been there for a while. So better to just bump everybody up to be on an equivocal level than to let the people who've been there longer suffer, so to speak.
Providing fair pay to make it a career is what we're aiming for.
Exactly.
Yes. Great way to close it, Ken, providing fair pay to make it a career. I want to thank all of you for such an insightful discussion. I know as vet techs, this is subject matter we feel extremely strongly about, and it was great to get back with everyone after a year and see where we are. Just as a reminder, everyone who attended or signed up for this webinar will receive a recording to watch on your own time, so don't stress about it. You'll get it in your inbox. And that concludes our discussion. Happy Vet Tech, everybody. Vet Tech Week. Also happy Vet Tech. Bye.